Good morning, Thrive. My name is Matt Hildebrand, and this morning I'm going to be talking about the story of Jonah. And the story of Jonah can most aptly be summarized by a man of God being an idiot, and God still showing up and showing that he is in control and that he loves us. But I figured before I launch into explaining why Noah is an idiot, I should probably let you guys know that so am I. So this is a story about me and my best friend, Ryan. And usually all of those stories, if I start a story by me and my best friend, Ryan, we've done something dumb. We grew up in Southeast Ohio, and we weren't always well supervised when we were at Ryan's house. And as Professor McGonagall put it in Harry Potter, that we had a proclivity to pyrotechnics, which really means that very rarely did we find a problem where the solution wasn't, have we tried to blow it up? So this was one of those times. So Ryan had a groundhog that lived in the hill behind his house. And, we thought, we can deal with this. So, it was always trying to raid Ryan's mom's garden and things like that, and we can deal with this. So, being industrious, and again, not well supervised, we decided that a small homemade explosive device was the best way to solve our groundhog problem. Kind of like Bill Murray in Caddyshack, down the hole, au revoir, gopher. Well, it didn't quite go as planned. So, me and my fellow mastermind decided that the best way to make this was to take a tennis ball and cut it open and fill it full of black powder. Now, we thought, that's not going to work super well. So then we took it and we wrapped the whole thing in twine, really nice and tight. And we figured, so we'd have a really nice, neat package that we'd just melt some wax over top of the twine, right? This will work. What can go wrong? So, as, Ryan held the groundhog space cadet device, I lit a candle and slowly started to drip wax onto the twine. Now, either because, we were dumb 15-year-olds, or because, we didn't have great dexterity or decision-making capabilities, somehow in this process, the candle and the fuse kind of came together. So we accidentally lit it in Ryan's bedroom. Now, Ryan's room was on the top floor, and we had a lot of options at this point of what we could have done. But we didn't do any of those things. We could have picked up the scissors that we were using and simply cut the wick off. We could have lobbed it out the open window and freed ourselves of this blight. But no, we panicked. And by panicked, we ran. With it. We didn't leave it. So we ran out of Ryan's room, down the hallway, down the stairs, through the hallway, through the kitchen, through the dining room, down another set of stairs, through his living room, and we finally chucked it into the valley behind his house, where it blew up. Now, like I said, in this whole process, we passed no fewer than 7 windows and 3 doors, any of which would have been a good option. But no. We ran through the entire breadth and height of his house to get this thing out the back door. Sometimes when we're faced with a terrifying reality, we panic. And I feel like that's what Jonah did. Jonah was faced with a terrifying reality, and he panicked. And that's most of the story of Jonah. In 1 Jonah 1-3, it says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah ran away from the Lord to head to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port, and after paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. So Jonah knew pretty clearly what God wanted him to do. but it was to go to Nineveh and preach against their wickedness. So Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, and the Assyrians at the time were the enemies of Jonah and his people. And the reason that they were the enemy of Jonah and his people is because they were a lot stronger. And what the Assyrians had a tendency to do was conquer everything and anything in their path. They took their people as slaves, took their possessions of their own, and they ended up becoming a very powerful, great nation by plundering everybody else. So not only did Jonah not want to go to Nineveh because he was scared for his own life, but he also didn't want to go preach in Nineveh because he didn't really want God to save the people of Nineveh because they weren't his people and they weren't the people that he thought should be saved. So he ran. He ran to Tarshish. And if you look at ancient maps, you're not going to find Tarshish. From the best estimates, Tarshish was all the way over in Spain, and it was a Phoenician mining colony where they mined ore and things in southern Spain. And as far as Jonah was concerned, Tarshish was the very end of the world. It was as far away from God and his people as he could get. So away he sailed. And along the way, a great storm came up. And when they were sailing back in those days, they didn't just sail across vast oceans. They followed the coastline because that's how they navigated. And so when this great storm came up, they tried to sail back to land because they could see it. They just couldn't get there. And they tried and they tried and they threw things overboard and they just couldn't get to where they needed to go. So they cast lots to say, who is at fault here? And cast lots was a game of chance, like drawing straws or dice or something like that. And it fell on Jonah. And Jonah says, yep, that's me. I did this. I am running away from my God who can absolutely do this. And the only way that you guys are going to save yourselves is by throwing me overboard. And they thought about it and thought, yeah, we don't want to do that. So they tried again, and they tried and they tried. And when they were losing all hope, they finally said, all right, let's do this. And they threw Noah overboard. And this is the part of the story that is probably best known, is when Jonah was falling into the ocean, a great whale or a fish came and swallowed Noah. And for 3 days and probably a couple of days at least, it says 3 days and 3 nights, but the wording really is sometime. And he spent inside the fish, and then he was vomited up on dry land. And Noah spent that time to pray to God and say, I'm sorry, and to do this. And then he went and he got spit out. So we're all the way up to Jonah 3, 1 through 6. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim the message I give you. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord, and he went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very large city, and it took 3 days to go through it. Jonah began going on a day's journey into the city, proclaiming, 40 more days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. The Ninevites believed in God, and a fast was proclaimed. All of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. When Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, and he took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. So Nineveh was a really long city. It actually wasn't very wide. It sat in a valley, and it was only about a half a mile wide and several miles long, and there were a couple of other cities kind of stacked on either side of the valley with it. So it was a big city, and it took a long time to walk from one end of it to the other. And Jonah was only about 1 day into this journey when he started preaching, and it spread like wildfire. And, you know, sometimes I kind of picture Noah as one of the most unlikely messengers. You know, he goes into a city where nobody knows him, smelling like fish guts, looking a mess, and just starts preaching fire and brimstone. Just everything's going to be overthrown and everything's bad. And the people of Nineveh goes, you know what, guys? I think he's right. That is wild. absolutely wild that this messenger, with the message that he had, was able to have that message spread through the city. And he was only one day into his journey, but it says that his warning reached the king of Nineveh. It didn't say Jonah reached the king of Nineveh. He didn't keep walking. His message was going faster than he was through the city of Nineveh. And the people turned from their evil ways, and they started to know God, and they meant it. And then in Jonah 3:10, when God saw that what they did and that they had turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring the destruction he had threatened. This is where most of the people leave the story of Jonah. And the book of Jonah is only 4 chapters, and this is the end of chapter 3. And if you left at the end of chapter 3, Jonah, had a rocky start, but kind of comes out looking the hero. But there's a 4th chapter, and that part's important. I wish I could say that, that Jonah then stayed in Nineveh and continued to preach and, preached the word, and the people loved him and grew from his teachings, and everything was happy. But that's not quite how it went. So beginning chapter 4, it says, "But to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry, and he prayed to the Lord. 'Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is why I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Take my life away. It is better for me to die than to live.'" It doesn't quite sound like the, wonderful teacher who was super excited that people were turning to God, which is why he was sent there. No, he threw a temper tantrum, and then God goes on to teach Noah again. So Jonah went up onto the hill above Nineveh, and he sat there waiting for God to destroy the city, which God had already told him he wasn't going to do. But he went up there to wait, and he sat in the Libyan desert on a hill baking for a couple of days. And he was still angry, and God sent a plant. God made a plant grow, a big vine that grew up overnight to shade Noah. And Noah was super happy about this plant. I said Noah again, didn't I? Jonah. And sent Jonah this plant, and he was really happy about it. And then the next day, a worm came and ate the plant. And then at the end of chapter 4, Jonah was saying, "I am so angry, I want to die again." But the Lord said, "You have been so concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight, and it died overnight. And should I not have more concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and many more animals?" What God was telling Jonah was, you are more concerned about a plant that you had absolutely nothing to do with than your concern for 120,000 people. 120,000 people who are like children that don't know any better. That is what he means when he says you can't tell your right hand from your left. That's how you would describe children. But the story of Jonah isn't a story about Jonah and his great deeds. In fact, Jonah's kind of an idiot. And he shows it again and again and again. The story of Jonah is the story of God doing great and amazing things. And loving all the people of the world. And loving them no matter what nation they're from or what terrible things they've done. God loves them all the same, and they're worth saving. God is going to ask us to do uncomfortable things. And God is going to ask us to do things we really don't want to do, like he asked Jonah. And God's going to show up in ways that we would never expect him to do, and in ways that we aren't according to our plans. But that's okay, because his plan is not our plan. He lets us be a part of it for our benefit, not for his benefit. His plan's going to happen no matter what. And I'm, for one, glad that he lets us come along for the ride, that he lets us be a part of it, even when we're underqualified or not equipped or scared or just an idiot. God uses those people in his plans. And, this is coming from somebody who almost blew up his friend's house. And to be honest, more than once, but those stories are for another time.